All right, I think we are here. Yes, I just got the notification. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining for this week's Snack In Chat, Adopt for Life's weekly Facebook Live, where we explore the topics that are top of mind for our families formed by adoption, kinship, and customary care. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that you probably noticed that we were offline last week. So all of our social media, our programming and support groups were paused. This was intentional out of respect of Indigenous communities and also an opportunity for us to pause, reflect, listen, and learn more. And we will remain committed to working towards our own goals of building a more diverse and equitable organization. And of course, as a community, we're always open to sharing resources. So if you do have some that will enable our ongoing learning, then please feel free to share those with us. So I am humbled and happy to be back with our community. For those that are new to our page, my name is Chantal. I'm the Community Engagement Liaison. I'm here with our lovely host, Catherine, and our guest today, Leah Kim Brighton, President of the Asian Adoptees of Canada, a national organization. So if you're watching this live, or maybe you're watching this later in the day on replay, we appreciate you being here. Of course, as always, you're free to ask your questions, just pop them in the chat. I will just take a brief moment to remind you that we are streaming live on our public Facebook page. So that just means whatever information you're putting in the comments is going to be available to the public. So you just want to be mindful of what that information is. So thanks for your patience. I'm going to introduce our guest now. Leah Kim Brighton is a Korean-Canadian adoptee born in South Korea. Leah lived in an orphanage until 4.5 years old. Following that, she was adopted to Vancouver, where she grew up, and then later obtained her master's in speech language pathology from the University of British Columbia. She practiced as a speech language pathologist for her first career in Vancouver. In 2007, Leah founded the Asian Adult Adoptees of BC, AAA BC. She later moved to Ottawa, engaged with local adoption community there while serving as a policy advisor. Following that, she migrated to Toronto and now runs Me-Ray Talent and Executive Search, a boutique recruitment agency staffing a number of tech startups and scale-ups. So having lived across 3 major cities, Leah saw consistent themes within the adoption community. And over the course of 2020, the digital interconnected world enabled AAABC to iterate into a national scope across Canada as the Asian Adoptees of Canada. In its current form, it serves to connect adult adoptees and all those in the adoption constellation to share resources and provide space for unique and nuanced conversations on a range of topics, including adoption, race, and identity. In her spare time, Leah is also board member on a local art gallery, serves as a talent advisor to MT Ventures startup division, and is also an advisor to the Ministers Advisory Council on Special Education, Ontario, specifically for speech language pathology services. So, I mean, super impressive, and super impressive that you have spare time. I'm just going to say that. So welcome, Leah. Thanks so much for being here with us today and taking time out of your day to join us. I'm going to just pass it over to Catherine because I think she has already a whole list of questions.
I do, and I appreciate that my internet is choppy, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me, even though I might be frozen in probably some awkward position. But Leah, thank you so much for joining us. I think before we went live, we're having a really good conversation, and I probably could have kept having that conversation for another hour. So I'm really excited to see what comes up for us today. For everyone watching, I do have my list of questions off screen, so you're going to see me just kind of looking over to the side because I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any of the questions. But are you good for us to kind of jump right in?
Definitely. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to you both and Adopt for Life to invite me. I'm really pleased to be here to chat with your members. And I will also say and encourage anybody who has questions as the conversation unfolds to certainly you're welcome to ask them in the chat. And I'm a pretty open book. So I'm happy to answer whatever. I've been doing these Q&As for quite some time. So yeah, I'm happy to answer kind of whatever curiosities you have about being like an international and transracial adoptee. So pleased to be here.
Awesome. I think that we're going to get into some really good conversations. You're like a pro at this right now. So you're used to these chats. So I appreciate it. You're even helping with tech support with my Zoom. So it's awesome. Okay, so let's just start with kind of some basics here. So tell us a little bit more about your organization. I understand it's been running since 2007. So what was really your push to kind of get started? What was your motivation for this?
Yeah, so I think the biggest factor was when I started becoming more involved in the adoptee community. I looked around in Canada. So this is when I lived in Vancouver in BC. And it was like just a desert. It was like a dearth of any kind of community or resources or dialogue within BC, but also, was I think dial-up internet still then. But even when I was searching on the internet, there really weren't a lot of resources here in Canada. And I felt very fortunate because I became really close with a number of adoptees in Seattle. And I became a pretty active member of the Asian Adult Adoptees of Washington. And so being, 3-4 hour commute, depending on the border, I spent quite a bit of time traveling back and forth. And what I really saw was just what a rich community it was and how in being able to have a group of people with this common shared experience, what it enabled them to do as far as finding support, getting access, asking questions, and everything, whether it's, their lives here in the US or in Canada, or if they so choose to do a birth search and what that looks like. So seeing that there was, seeing the effect of having that kind of community within Seattle and then elsewhere all across the US, because there are many adoptee communities within different states. It's really what prompted kind of the inception of AAABC and its initial iteration, and really just focusing on like the Lower Mainland for the most part. So most of our members were from Vancouver Island, Langley, Abbotsford, and kind of that quadrant within the province.
That's awesome. So like as you guys have grown, then I'm sure you've seen the benefits, obviously, of having an organization like this. So I'm wondering if you can share, like, what does it actually mean to have an organization specifically for Asian adoptees to come and connect, and why that's so important, especially for international adoptees.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, some of it kind of harkens back to what we were talking about at the beginning. So off camera, offline. But a lot of the adoption narrative and the dialogue and kind of the dynamics within adoption as they stand today are very much centered around adoptive parents and adoption agencies. And, as adoptees, we are all very cute when we arrive. Often, most of us are children, but we grow up. We become fully formed adults, hopefully, right? If we are so lucky and we are able to age. And the reality is that having the perspective as an adoptee to create that shared space and experience creates a different kind of dialogue. And I think people can maybe understand it as far as, if you have like a shared profession, right? Like if you have a room full of teachers and they're able to talk about what their experience has been like over the last year, trying to teach remotely during a global pandemic, right? Their conversation and engagement would be very different than, say, if it was one teacher in a room full of construction workers, right? Like that would be a very different dialogue that they would have. And so by having lived this, I'd say, specific experience as a transracial adoptee in Canada and being able to share what that experience was like and create opportunities to have simply the dialogue. And then with that, I would also say, there were a lot of resources that I found, through happen chance, through friends, through networking, through Google searches, through books. Remember those?
Yeah.
And being able to share them within the adoptee community that I know of here. I mean, undeniably, it changed the course of a lot of adoptees in their lives, as far as being able to be supported, whether it's through funding or education or language programs, to go back to Korea or even here in Canada. And it's really, these are all programs that are available for Korean adoptees or Chinese adoptees, or, you can fill in the blanks. Every country obviously has different services and opportunities available that vary for a number of different reasons, but I think it would be really fantastic if there were some Canadian adoptees who are able to take advantage of those programs, because as it stands now, Canada's really not very present in those communities and at that dialogue, to have that dialogue be present, because they're, unlike in the US or Sweden or Denmark or France, which have really strong and robust adoptee communities there who are able to notify their members and support their members. We just haven't had as much, our community hasn't been as cohesive to be able to support our members to take advantage of those initiatives.
That makes sense. And I remember we've had a couple of other organizations come on who are specifically to support adoptees, maybe not international, just adoptees in general. And kind of like an underlying theme I kept hearing was like, it's just great to be connected with other people who get it, and that we can share something and not feel, as we had talked about off this live stream, we had said, there are some families who are looking into openness or wanting to look for their birth family, but they were scared about their adoptive parents' reaction, and having a space where they can talk about that was really helpful. And so I can just imagine as well that for your organization, the support you provide adoptees, no matter kind of where they are in that journey, it just kind of gives that, probably lack of a better term, like that validation that it's okay to have all these gamut of emotions. And yeah, you're right, the adoptive parents, we have the biggest voice. And I think for us as a community of adoptive kin and customary care families, we need to hear your voices and understand the complexities, and using our power and privilege to be able to have a platform for you guys to actually have the support and advocate to get you guys the resources that are actually needed. I think is really important. And I think as an adoptive organization, we need to appreciate how we can support you guys. So it's a question that I have later on in the list. I'm trying to stick to the list so that we can there's so many good questions here. And I know I'm going to go off the rails with a bunch of other questions, but I do have one that we snuck in just before we went live. And it was something that was actually written in your bio. So I'm going to just read it so I can give it justice. It said something, I'm paraphrasing here, you lived through various different cities, and that you saw, consistent themes within the adoption community. I'm wondering if you can expand or talk a little bit what these themes are and how your organization is hoping to address or support these themes. I feel like came off as like a job interview question, but it doesn't need to be that formal. Yeah, we're just interested in what these kind of themes are and what you're hoping to support your community with.
Yeah, and I think it's very much echoing what we've already discussed, as far as consistently, regardless of like geography. So you could say proportionately, as far as like demographics across Canada, you would anticipate, say, Toronto and Vancouver being larger cities, and I think the recipient of more probably international adoptees than, say, maybe Ottawa or some other cities within the country, or Calgary. I spent some time there as well. But there's a consistent absence of adoptee voices and adoptee communities or organizations or supports that are led by other adoptees who have just that baseline understanding. And it's just, it's like this ability to be able to start a conversation without having to provide like additional a backstory for like why, why this is the way it is, So, you could say like, if you're an athlete, right? Like if you're I play tennis, I like tennis, played tennis this morning. It's very hot right now if you're playing tennis. We tried to beat it. We got to the courts at 7. It was not early enough. It was so hot and so humid.
You were up at 7. I think that just
He was
that
playing
Oh,
tennis
being
at
up at
7.
7
I was
is
up at
kudos.
court. I was up at 6:30. But, yeah, but
That itself deserves kudos. So sorry, off the rail. Go ahead.
but the point is that if you're talking to other people who play tennis, like you could talk about like, you know, how you hold the racket, you know, your different forehand or backhand, if you have a two-handed backhand, or, you know, you can already just like dive into the conversation as far as like why you use different techniques, what players you like, if you're watching Wimbledon, like there's just this baseline foundation for the conversation that you will have with other people who just like tennis. I mean, I'm not a professional. I am no Serena Williams. I'm just like I like to have a rally, but it's like this common understanding that you have with other people, right? And it's the same idea as far as for, you know, for international adoptees. Most of us are transracially adopted. So most of us have, our parents are Caucasian. That's generally the, you know, the dynamic. And so being able, what was very noticeable was the absence of that, the absence of any of those communities versus, I'll say, because, you know, the States are our closest neighbors. In the US, there are very strong communities. I mean, I attended a Zoom for, well, the Asian Adoptees of Washington, right? They just had their 20th anniversary for their community and how like active it is, right? AK, which is also known as in New York, you know, they've been around for 25 years and they have a very large and vocal community. So those are like across coasts, right? From east to west, and everything in between. Minnesota's probably has the most number of Korean adoptees as far as per capita. But they have just these really vibrant communities in their major cities. And I would say for Vancouver and Toronto to be, you know, very large cities within Canada, and to be also very diverse, you know, relatively speaking to other cities, for there to be in such a visible absence of a community that's led by adoptees, to be able to have, to be able to have this dialogue or share resources. And also, you know, what I think is really important is to try and provide support for everybody in the adoption triad. You know, birth families are obviously more challenging because usually they're international, but I think it's really important, you know, and what we have consistently done as far as the events that we've had is we've always, adoptive parents have been an important part of the community that we're building as well.
Thank you. And I know that we have a question that came live. Sorry, thank you so much for that. I think it's so important. I didn't mean to brush over what you're saying. I think it's so important. I just got excited because we got a question live. So.
I know, but I'm going to relay that to you now, because it does kind of tie into that, and it's directly from a parent who's asking, what are some suggestions or the best things transracial international adoptive parents can do to support their child or their children? I mean, I know that's a huge question, but if you could maybe, you know, give it a go.
Yeah, so definitely a big question, but a great question. So kudos for asking. And I think, so I usually like to say this at the beginning as well, like I'm just one adoptee and what my experience is, like I am not representative of all adoptees, right? I am like one individual, though we are a minority, like a small population, you can't take like my experience as a voice for everybody. But I think what's consistent and what's just developmentally reasonable is that it's important to recognize that adoption changes throughout a lifetime, right? And it can be, I think, challenging for both adoptees and adopted families because it doesn't have like the physiological markers that we associate with development, like typical development, right? So being like an infant to a toddler, to a child, to a preteen, to a teen, like those are just like physical changes that you can see. Or, you know, life milestone changes, right? Whether it's, you know, graduating high school or getting a driver's license or voting or, you know, whatever else it may be. So those are very, you know, tangible things that we can see. But for an adoptee, whatever their adoption experience may be and their evolution and interpretation of it, that can happen at any time. Like some adoptees are interested, have zero interest in their, you know, their culture of origin, or doing a birth search until they're 50. Like there are a number of adoptees that I'm friends with, and once they turned 50, they decided that they wanted to suddenly like reunite and go back to Korea and do a search. And I think regardless, what's most important is to be able to be open and have that dialogue, and just to not just assume that you're the adoptee, and everybody in your family, to be honest, because it shouldn't just be between yourself and like the adoptee, because that's a lot of pressure for one individual within a family. But I think what's really important is to have like this overall understanding that there can be an open dialogue, and there can be hard questions asked, there can be difficult conversations, and it's permitted to have that space. And you can disagree, like it's permitted and it's fine. There's no like ramifications for disagreeing, because it's just part of the dialogue for anything. People can have lots of opinions about any variety of topics, except for international adoption, because there's just like one answer that there should be, right? So what's really important is to recognize and make space for different opinions, and also an evolution, right? Whoever your child may be as an adoptee, their opinions whenever you're like 8 versus 12 versus 43 will likely be radically different. And that is also definitely permitted as well. So I think the main theme I would say, which is most important, is to make space, to have an open dialogue and encourage it across everybody in the family, and to recognize that there will very likely be an evolution for what that means. That was a long answer.
It was fantastic.
Great, amazing answer. I kind of just put a little quote in there just because it was so well said. So thank you.
Quotable moments right here. I like it. And I think, listening to this and like your answer to this, it kind of goes back to, there's a lot of fear, and we have many closed groups for adoptive kin and customary care families. And a lot of times parents are worried, and this isn't specific to international adoption, but they're worried that they won't know the answer. Or the answer is, I don't know if I can ever find that out. Or the answer is, first of all, the question always comes at some random time. You can be like, okay, sit down on the couch and let's, no, it's always when something else is happening, right? And so there's always that kind of fear of like, will I be caught off guard and answer something wrong? Or will I not know? And I feel like it's okay to do all of that. And it's okay to go back and say, how you asked me X, Y, and Z, I don't think I handled that right. Or, you know what, I might actually know a bit more information. And, for my children are not internationally adopted, but we keep books and we write things down. And as we find out, because again, my children are younger, so they ask specific questions, but it doesn't mean when they have kids, if they ever have children, like something might spring. So we kind of have as much information that we know. And if we don't know, then we say we don't know. And we try, to have that open heart to say like, it's okay to not always know, and we'll do our best to find answers as well.
And I think, yeah, Catherine, you raise a really important point, is that it's much preferred to go back and reference a conversation and say like, maybe we should have a do-over, or I'd like to add more, versus just trying to brush it under the rug and hope that your child won't say anything again, or they won't notice that you don't know, or you're dancing around, the actual point. It is much preferred to just be very candid at any age, right? There was a trend for a while where, if a child was under the age of 8, they'd make up some story about whatever, because they weren't ready for the actual conversation about adoption and what that actually meant. I really don't agree with that, like fundamentally do not agree with that approach. And what is, by dancing around it, like kids are smart, kids are very smart. So they can tell if you're uncomfortable and you're not able to actually be present to have whatever difficult conversation at any age. And if they feel like that, then that's setting a precedent so that it then becomes increasingly more difficult across their lifespan for when they're, when they're 16 or like, in high school and trying to figure themselves out, right? And then when they're, maybe if they choose to have a family, right? Like, and what that looks like. So the conversations that you have at every point and every age and stage are helping to plant the seeds and water that seed so that you can continue to have meaningful conversations at subsequent points in their lives. What I'll also say is that for anybody who hasn't had those conversations or felt like they haven't necessarily held them in the way or hosted them in the way that they wanted to, it's not too late. Don't feel like you've done like irreparable damage. So don't feel like that either. I think what's really important is that a general a general consistent theme is just to be able to have the courage, because it does take courage, to have difficult conversations where you won't know necessarily all the answers, where there may be some disagreements, where there will very likely be a lot of ambiguity or unknowns, and that's okay. Like, that's just, to be honest, that's just a reality of being an adoptee. I mean, for myself, there's literally 4.5 years of my life that I don't know, like 2 photos. I have 0 baby photos, and I have 2 photos of my entire child life before I came to Canada. And I like, that's just the reality. It's like, I will never know. Like, I will never know when I started walking or what my first word was, or I don't know, all those things, right? So, but that's just like, as an adoptee. So for me, like, I just accept that. I'm like, okay, that's just, you know, that's just a part of my life that I won't know. What I do know is, you know, in front of me now. And so, you know, that's, you can also have that conversation as well, as far as, you know, there's just a reality of many unknowns.
Yeah, and I'll just say, just from my perspective too, is not as initiating as the adoptive parent, or is initiating those conversations, and not always waiting for your child to ask those questions. So from my perspective, I felt like, okay, well, they're not bringing it up, so I'm not going to bring it up, right? Because I don't, maybe this is something we don't talk about. So I think just, you know, making those moments just a normal part of your day-to-day conversation, right? And hopefully it will become easier and easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's like a fear, like, as an adoptive mom, it was like, well, they're not, you know, this is, any parent, you know, we want to protect our kids. And it's like, and sometimes some children's background and where they came from isn't happy. It isn't always good. And it's, if we hold this information, it's like, oh, well, they're not asking, so I'm just not going to say, or I'm going to brush over, make it rosy colored because that's going to be helpful. And then, but that's not reality. And how are your kids going to trust you to ask more hard, like keep asking and keep coming to you if we don't have the, obviously it needs to be age appropriate, but I absolutely agree. I remember, Chantel, the first time my son, who's now 9, we were driving and we were late for something, and we were driving in the car, and he brought up like this question about his birth family, and I was completely floored, had no idea how to answer. I think I was about 4 years old, and yes, we've talked about adoption, we have books, but I wasn't prepared for this. And I was like, you know what, buddy, I don't actually know the answer to this question, but I hear you, and I'm going to find out, and I'll get back to you. And I remember, you know, connecting with his first family, and I got the answer, and I got back to him. I said, you know how you asked me this question? Here it is. I said, but you need to keep asking. And then I realized for 2-3 years, I hadn't given him that space, and I was caught so off guard. So you live and learn. So from then on, I keep asking, and he thinks I'm annoying now because I'm, hey, do you have any questions about this? Or let's look at this picture. And, you know, he's 9, so I'm just annoying in general. So, but it's true. It makes that space, right? And now we do have really hard conversations, and we have hard conversations that triggers my own sensitivities. And I'm like, wow, I really need to talk about this because clearly I'm having issues. So I think, like, because we hold the power, I think it's, both of you brought up really great points that we need to keep having this. And it's the best way to support, I mean, from my perspective, is to be okay with being vulnerable as well as an adoptive parent.
Yeah, and I think what Leah was saying too is sometimes there is a lack of information, right? But not to just say, well, that closes the door and we don't need to talk about it anymore. Like, that's, you still have to explore those conversations, and even though you don't have, there might not be information there, but it doesn't necessarily stop the conversation from happening. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking.
We're going on a rant, but I think too, that like maybe even instead of exploring that we don't know the answer, exploring how that makes them feel. It's like, I don't know this. That must be really hard. Like, and if we can't support it, maybe there's other people. Do you want to connect with other adoptees who can support you, or is there a professional that you can talk to? That's a great question. I don't know who asked that, but clearly, great conversation here.
Yes, thank you for asking.
We have 15 minutes. I'm going to try and I think I've asked you like 3 questions. Let's try and see. I'm just going to jump to, I don't even know if this is one of the questions. I'm going to ask it though.
Go for it.
As adoptive parents, as an adoptive organization, what can we do to help support you? So, you know, I've listened to you talk about how there is such a gap in support, and how, you know, there needs to be more cohesive and in supports and resources for adoptees and organizations like yours, what can we do on a personal level and on a organizational level for anyone who might be watching to help support you guys? That was a long question, but I think you got it.
No, that's great, and I really appreciate it. And what you're doing right now, right? Like making space for the adult adoptee voice specifically to speak for ourselves, because I think a lot of, the narrative that Hollywood likes to portray is that adoptees are forever infantilized. Like we don't age past maybe 12 because we still look cute, but we're adults. We all grow up, and so I'd say, being a supporter and promoting whatever, like letting people know about our events, letting people know about who we are. But I would also say, like, when adult adoptees are not present in the room, right? Like, what are those conversations where we're not present that we don't even know are happening and, are existing? And being that voice and an advocate to say, a very important part of this adoption triad are adoptees. Maybe they should be a part of this dialogue as well. Maybe they should have a seat at this table. Maybe we should send that email. Maybe we should pick up that phone. Maybe we should see what additional context that they might be able to provide. And I think it can be surprising in the sense of, oh, there's an assumption as far as like, we've already covered everything, or this may be really trivial, or, the lens that people have for their biases, which is just very natural. But I think people are generally quite consistently surprised as far as having the perspective and lens as an adoptee, the different things that resonate, the different, perspectives that you can contribute, and experiences that are had, and how that can shape whether that's policy, whether that's programming, whether that's whatever it may be. And I feel like that's one of the biggest ways that you could support, not just the Asian Adoptees of Canada, but adoptees in general, is to advocate for adoptees and our voices, and to be present in whatever room or community or table that you're at, so that there's space that's made for us, because I can rest assured we are all very good at using our voices. So that, I would say that would be like the biggest and most impactful way. And I really feel for the Asian Adoptees of Canada, that's what I would love. I would love for people, whether it is Asian adoptees or domestic adoptees, like any adoptee, for adult adoptees to be able to be substantial members, to be a part of these conversations, have these conversations, because there are constant evolutions for what policies are being formed. Even as you mentioned, like with the First Nations community and what's happening, there are lots of different changes that are happening there. So the Hague Convention, there are many different spaces and places that I feel it's really important to have adoptee voices present. And not just like adoptee advocates, who are obviously important, right? We all need people in partnerships. But what I know for certain is that, we all grow up, as I mentioned, if we are so fortunate, we all grow up and become adults. And I think we all have different perspectives that are able to better inform policymaking and decision-making or programming or conversations, that can, more accurately capture and serve, the broader community.
Thank you so much for that. And so for your organization specific, so this is open, it's a public feed. So if there are Asian adoptees who want to connect with you, or if there are adoptive parents who want to follow you on socials or to get more information, how can we do that? I know you guys have a few social channels, and so is that right now your main source of getting information out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're working on the website. Unfortunately, our web designer was quite ill, so Facebook would be our primary means as far as connecting for right now. We have a very small modest presence on other platforms, but I would say Facebook is like our longest standing social media platform. And then if people are interested, they're welcome also to reach out to info@asianadoptees.ca. So that's just the general account. Megan manages that account. She's another board member. She's fantastic. She's also happens to be another Korean adoptee. So those are just different ways to reach out and engage. And then, you can certainly, I would welcome anybody to keep an eye out for some different programming. We are taking the summer off because I think that most people after 8 months in lockdown want to be outside. my wild
Yes.
guess. So we've decided to take the summer off for different programming and let people enjoy, hopefully, a double vaxxed or single vaxxed summer. And we'll have some different events that we're working on right now for the fall.
Awesome. And we'll for sure make sure to keep an eye on your Facebook and be able to share within our communities as well, because I think it's so important and people want to be engaged, especially like you mentioned, like we've been so isolated. I think people just want to see other people right now. So we'll be sure to share it. And I'm fairly certain that as I'm talking, Chantal is actually writing all of the social channels up on our comments. So this stays up on our Facebook page forever. Eventually it'll be moved to YouTube. So if you want as well, when your website is up and running, you can feel free to come back to this and just maybe, or let Chantal and I know, and we can actually put it in the comments as well. So people who are watching this on replay, they can come and take a look. But I think it's really important. And then the fact that it's now, you've switched to more of a national to try and get a stronger connection across our country, I think right now it's really needed in general. And I know that we do have a lot of international families and Asian adoptees that will want to join and want to be able to support you and continue to learn. I'm just going to double check to make sure if there's any other questions. These are big. Okay, this is our last question. I love this one. So before we wrap up, we want to kind of give you the platform to see if there's anything that you want to speak freely about to our community. First of all, I think we could have about 15 snack and chats together because I love talking to you. But is there anything that you think that you want to just kind of speak on or share or talk about? We have about just a couple minutes before we'll wrap up.
Yeah,
it's kind of a hard question to ask
this is
somebody.
Always such a tough one.
Just like put you on the spot, come up with something really inspirational, and that's about it.
Follow your dreams now. So, I feel like this has been a central theme throughout this whole, time that we've been together. But adoption, whether it's international adoption or domestic adoption, comes with so many, unknowns, right? Like so many unknowns. And even if it is an open adoption, there are still many unknowns as far as like what that origin story is, right? And then there's unknowns as far as, every adoptee is different, right? Every adoptee is different in how they, internalize or, evolve and grow their own identity, how they integrate that within their current lives they have today, their curiosity and interest in their history, whether it's known or not. And I think what's really important is just to be able to have the courage, because I really do think it takes courage to have difficult conversations and to be open and interested and invite dialogue at any age and stage, and recognize that it's okay to have ambiguity. It's all right to say you don't know. It's okay to like try and do an adventure together, to learn something together, right? Or to do whatever research you want. And I think that's, and also, to encourage adoptees, whether, your children or people within your community, to find community, right? So that they find and connect other adoptees who have a similar experience as them. I think those are all really important. And if you do have like an intercultural adoptee, I really encourage you to try and make space to not just tokenize that like cultural background or ethnic background that person, your child comes from, but to really make it in some way a part of your family and a part of your life. And this is always what I would further challenge you to do, if you so choose to accept this challenge, would be to really encourage not just your immediate nuclear family or your immediate family, but your extended family, right? So that's like your aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, because your child will navigate throughout the world. How the world responds is that is like left unto the world. But how you as a family, not just your immediate family, but the entire constellation of what your family is, you can really help to provide a supportive environment, so that if they do go to grandma's and grandpa's house and they have questions about whatever adoption, about their culture, that your, grandma and grandpa feel, hopefully they also feel supported and feel equipped to at least provide some kind of insight and be some kind of Sherpa for your child. So I'd really encourage you to think about, the entire world that your child operates within, because what you're able to do now as the luxury of being a parent is you really are crafting their world that they navigate before they go out into whatever big world they see. That's it.
That was beautiful.
That was great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate coming and you being just so open to chatting about what we end up getting into. We never get to all the questions. So if anyone has any other questions for Leah or about her organization, we happen to have her contact. So feel free, if you're watching this on replay as well, feel free to keep commenting. This is engaging and we want you to feel comfortable in sharing non-identifying information, questions that you may have. And if we don't have the answer, we will find somebody who does. So Leah, thank you so much for joining us. Chantel, I know we have a webinar coming up and next week's Snack and Chat, so I'm going to totally put you on the spot and see if you want to chat about that a bit more as we wrap up.
Great, thank you. And thanks again, Leah, for sharing with us today and being so open in the discussion. It's really, really appreciated. I hope that you'll come back because I feel like this was just sort of like part one. So I'm going to make you commit on air live.
I solemnly promise to return.
And Catherine, you're correct. So next week's Snack and Chat OFIFC is coming on. We're talking about the Friendship Center movement. So we're going to talk to them and learn more about that. So I know we're all looking forward to that. So make sure you tune in. For our community families, Kim Barthel, the part 3 of becoming a behavioral detective is happening July 13th at 7 p.m. So you can head over to our website if you haven't registered yet. Just go to adoptforlife.com and register there. There's still time to do that. And I think we'll leave it at that for today. So if you want to be up to date on everything we're doing, just like and follow our public page, and that way you won't miss a thing. So have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again to Leah for being here. Take care of yourselves. Until next time.
Thank you.